Okay, let's talk about concept question 5.14 from chapter 2. This question is about specialization and comparative advantage. So the question asks, or tells us, that in 2 hours, Vanessa can make 5 quarts of ice cream or 2 cherry cobblers. She has a friend, Sonia, who can make 9 quarts of ice cream or 1 cherry cobbler. Here the key point, or the key word, is the word or. So you imagine one person with her just 2 hands in just one kitchen. She can only make one thing or the other. She can't be making 2 things at the same time. So if she spends 2 hours making something, it can only either be ice cream or cherry cobbler. So she can make 5 quarts of ice cream, or she can make 2 cherry cobblers. She can't do both, right? And so the same thing applies for both Vanessa and Sonia. So the first part of the question asks us, what happens if Vanessa specializes in ice cream and Sonia specializes in cherry cobblers? What will be the total production for both Vanessa and Sonia of ice cream and then of cherry cobbler? So the key thing to notice here is the word specialization. And from your chapter, you know that what it means to specialize is to focus on making that one thing. So when it says that Vanessa specializes in ice cream, that means Vanessa is making nothing but ice cream. And when it says Sonia is specializing in cherry cobbler, that means Sonia is making nothing but cherry cobbler. So then we can look at what our total production of each item is. So the total production of ice cream, because Vanessa is the one making ice cream and Sonia is not making any, is just going to be how much ice cream can Vanessa make in those 2 hours. And we're told Vanessa can make 5 quarts of ice cream. So we end up with 5 quarts of ice cream in our economy, if we consider these 2 friends to be our little dessert economy. We end up with a total production of just 5 quarts of ice cream, because that's how much Vanessa can make. And Sonia's not making any because she's specializing in cherry cobbler. But then we look at what the total production of cherry cobbler will be, and we know that Sonia is the only one making cherry cobbler because she's specializing in that, and Vanessa, on the other hand, is only making ice cream. So how much cherry cobbler can Sonia make? She can make 1, right? So that's what we end up with in our little economy of dessert, is we end up with just 5 quarts of ice cream and 1 cherry cobbler. So I'll check my answer here. It's good to go. So the next part of the question flips that around and says, what then happens if Vanessa specializes in cherry cobbler and Sonia specializes in ice cream? Now what's our total production of ice cream and of cherry cobbler? So now Vanessa is making cobbler and Sonia is making ice cream. So how much ice cream do we end up with? We end up with however much Sonia can make, which we're told in the beginning that Sonia can make 9 quarts of ice cream. And how much cherry cobbler do we end up with total? We end up with however much Vanessa can make, because she's the only one making cherry cobbler. And we're told in the beginning she can make 2 cherry cobblers. So our economy of dessert now ends up with 9 quarts of ice cream and 2 cherry cobblers, if the girls specialize in this way. So the last part of the question is about comparative advantage. We want to know who has the comparative advantage in each of the 2 desserts. And it's helpful here to remember the textbook definition of comparative advantage. And the textbook definition tells us that comparative advantage is the ability to produce a good or a service, right over here, at a lower opportunity cost compared to other producers. So what we need to know is, what is the opportunity cost to each girl for making each dessert? And then we'll be able to compare and see who has the lower opportunity cost. So how do we figure out the opportunity cost of making ice cream? We've got to know, how much cherry cobbler do I have to give up in order to make ice cream? And for me, the easiest way to go about this is just to divide. So if I want to know the comparative advantage for ice cream, I'm going to divide number of cherry cobblers I can make divided by the number of ice creams I can make. Okay? Does that make sense? So whichever one I want to know the comparative advantage for, I'm going to put that on the bottom of my fraction in my division. Okay? So I want to know who has the comparative advantage in ice cream? What is my opportunity cost for making ice cream? So what I'm going to do here, let's clear my calculator, is for Vanessa. To figure out Vanessa's opportunity cost of making ice cream, how many cherry cobblers does she have to give up to make a quart of ice cream? I'm going to take the number of cherry cobblers she can make in 2 hours, which is 2, and I'm going to divide that by the number of quarts of ice cream she can make in 2 hours, which is 5. 2 divided by 5. Because I'm looking for the cost of making ice cream, I'll put ice cream on the bottom of the fraction, okay? So it costs Vanessa 0.4 cherry cobblers for every quart of ice cream. Does that make sense? So 0.4 cherry cobblers per ice cream is what she has to give up to make ice cream. Let's look at what Sonia has to give up to make ice cream. She can make 1 cherry cobbler or 9 quarts of ice cream. So I'll take her 1 cherry cobbler divided by 9 quarts of ice cream, and she has to give up 0.11111, all the ones, cherry cobblers to make a quart of ice cream. So here we find out that Sonia's price or cost of making ice cream is lower. She can make ice cream faster, better. For whatever reason, she's better at making ice cream than Vanessa is. So Sonia has the comparative advantage in making ice cream because her cost of making ice cream is lower. So I'll go ahead and fill that in here. Sonia has the comparative advantage in ice cream. So the next question is, who then has the comparative advantage in cherry cobbler? And we'll do the same thing. So I'll clear out my calculator here. If I want to know the cost of making cherry cobbler, now I'm going to put cherry cobbler on the bottom of my fraction, on the bottom for my division, okay? So how many quarts of ice cream does Vanessa have to give up to make a cherry cobbler? I'm going to say 5 quarts of ice cream divided by 2 cherry cobblers, which just comes from these numbers over here of what Vanessa can make if she specializes. 5 divided by 2, 2.5. So Vanessa gives up 2.5 quarts of ice cream to make 1 cherry cobbler. What about Sonia? Sonia can make 9 quarts of ice cream or 1 cherry cobbler. So 9 divided by 1 is just 9. So Sonia has to give up 9 quarts of ice cream to make a cherry cobbler, where Vanessa only has to give up 2.5 quarts of ice cream to make a cherry cobbler. So the cost then to Vanessa for making cobbler is lower, a good bit lower, than the cost for Sonia. So Vanessa then has the comparative advantage in cherry cobblers. Hope that makes sense. It's a little bit, there's some math involved here, so if it's something that you would rather talk to me about when we can talk back and forth and you can ask questions, feel free to come to my office hours and we'll chat about it further there. Also, feel free to send more questions my way by email or however you need to do that.